This is tutorial number 15 of the Foundation Theory course, brought to you by the Radio and Electronics School. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss some of the safety aspects that you need to know as a Foundation amateur radio operator. All radio amateurs are proud of their amateur radio station. It doesn't matter if it's a simple station built into a bookshelf like this young man here, or a more elaborate station like this young lady's got. Radio amateurs take a fair bit of pride in the neatness and appearance of their station, and also the electrical and mechanical safety. And they also have concerns about safety, radio frequency safety, to other people, such as neighbours and perhaps even animals as well. One of the obvious dangers in amateur radio is high voltages. There are high voltages in the power point, the power socket that comes into your home that you're going to plug your amateur radio equipment into. But higher voltages can be found in older valve type radio equipment. It doesn't mean you can't find high voltages in newer semiconductor equipment. You have to be aware of that, the possibility of that. And because the Foundation license is an entry-level license and not a very technical license, the Foundation licensee is not permitted to remove the covers from their equipment. Removing the covers could expose the young operator to high voltages, causing them to receive an electric shock, and in a worst case they could even die, and that's called electrocution. So valve amateur radio equipment, amplifiers, any of those, even semiconductor radio equipment, can have voltages in them which can be dangerous, can cause death, and we certainly don't want the Foundation operator to be removing covers. Sometimes the operator has to make an internal adjustment. If you have to make an internal adjustment, usually the radio will have some sort of panel that you can remove and adjust your whatever it is you need to adjust. You'll find some adjustments there. There is no need to take the big cover off of any radio and expose yourself to the dangers of high voltages. So Foundation licensees should not remove the covers from transmitting equipment. The reason for this imposition on your Foundation license is for safety, because the Foundation license may be used by children as young as 11 or 12, or indeed elderly people as well. But because the ACMA decided to introduce a Foundation license to encourage young people into amateur radio, and it was the WIA's idea as well, they were concerned about the exposure to high voltages of young radio amateurs. So for this reason, there is a condition on the Foundation licensee that he cannot remove the covers and experiment with the internals of his or her amateur radio equipment. Of course, if the Foundation licensee has extra qualifications, for example, they may be an electrician, then that might make them a competent person to wire up a power point. It also might make them a competent person, depending upon their experience, to make some minor adjustments. But basically, if you just have a Foundation license and no other competency at all, you should not be removing the covers from your equipment, and the equipment you use should be commercially purchased amateur radio equipment. Sounds a bit hard, but if you recall or just remember, the reasons for it is to encourage young people into amateur radio, and since they may get hold of high voltage equipment, we have to look out for their safety. So anyone that's got a Foundation license will know what their limits are as far as modification to equipment. Just a Foundation license and that's all. Do not remove covers or make any modifications to equipment at all. High voltages will certainly give you an electric shock, and if the shock is bad enough, they'll kill you, and that's called electrocution. On the other hand, high currents with low voltages will not give you an electric shock. However, a high current, when a current flows through a conductor, it produces a great deal of heat, and if you were hanging on to that conductor at the time, you could get severely burned, or high currents could produce enough heat to start a fire. Here we have got a chap using an arc welder. Well, the voltage here is very low, so he's in no danger of an electric shock, but he's in quite a lot of danger from being burned, because the current used by an electric welder is 40 to 60 amperes or even more, and so he's got a whole lot of safety gear on to protect him from being burned, and also for his eyesight as well. So high currents cause heat, and they can burn or start a fire. For that reason, we don't use extension leads rolled up. If you needed a short extension lead and you used a long one and left it all rolled up, and a large amount of current was drawn through this extension lead, then this lead could become very, very hot, and it could even melt, and the wires could short together, blow a fuse, or worse, a fire could be started. The other thing about leads is you shouldn't have a trip hazard. You shouldn't have leads running across the floor. A rat's nest of extension leads and power boards should be avoided. The other thing that a really good amateur radio station would have is a single off switch, so that if someone did get an electric shock or have some sort of trouble, or there was a fire, then you can power down the whole station with a single off switch. That's not a mandatory requirement. That's just good engineering practice for an amateur radio station. Not all amateurs do it. I do it. I think it's a really good idea to have a double pole, double throw switch that will cut off all the power with one switch to your station. The reason why we have radio and electrical earths is for safety. Well, not just safety, primarily safety, but a good electrical earth or ground will also at times prevent interference to your domestic equipment and perhaps to your neighbour's domestic equipment. So earths are for two reasons. The primary reason, this is an electrical earth, a copper stake driven into the ground. That is there for your electrical safety. The earth in your power point, if you live in a country that has an earth and a power point, then your earth will be connected to this. It's very important that only competent persons adjust or change an earth connection, and only competent persons should touch power leads, extension leads, power points, or any equipment that has mains electrical voltage in it. Should only be attempted by competent persons. Such a competent person may be a foundation license, for example, if they have a B grade electrical license. If you find yourself in a situation where a person is receiving an electric shock, the very, very first thing you must do for yourself is make sure that you are safe. And that means that before even touching the person receiving the electric shock, the best thing is to somehow remove the power. Now, the easiest way to do that is to run to the power board and turn the mains switch off. If you can't do that and you don't feel competent about pulling the person away from the electric shock using an insulator or a dry rope, and that's a very dangerous thing for you to do, then you should run for assistance immediately. But before you run for assistance, you should at least know how to turn your power off. If you know how to do CPR and how to turn the power off, then after turning the power off, you would attend to the patient. You would make sure they're breathing, they've got a heartbeat, and if necessary, you would give them CPR. I'm not going to go into CPR. There is a CPR sheet in your foundation manual. I may type up a CPR diagram and make it available to you in the document folder of this DVD. Um, but for your foundation license, all you really need to know about CPR, I say this because you don't need to know CPR to pass your foundation assessment. However, morally, you should be aware of what CPR is and how to use it, because you could save someone's life with it. Just remember, someone gets an electric shock, very first thing you do is turn the power off and then attend to the person by whatever means you're able to do so. A fuse is just a small piece of wire in a glass tube, and there's other types of fuses, but this is one type. We just have two conductors, two terminals on the end, and a small piece of wire. And that small piece of wire might be rated at 10 amperes. So if more than 10 amperes flows through that wire will melt and the circuit will be opened. That means generally something may have gone wrong in the radio for that fuse to blow, or whatever the fuse is in. You would always replace this fuse with a fuse of the same current rating. If it was a 10 amp fuse and it blew and you put a 20 amp fuse in, you could do more damage to your transceiver and you could even start a fire. So fuses should always be replaced with ones of the same type and the same current rating. All electrical appliances in Australia have a sticker on them saying that all electrical appliances, plug packs, power supplies, any electronic or electrical equipment which is connected to the mains household supply in Australia should have an electrical compliance sticker. And it's your responsibility to make sure that it does. If you buy new amateur radio equipment from overseas, outside of Australia, that equipment may not comply with the electricity requirements, regulatory requirements in Australia. So it's your responsibility to make sure that all of your electrical equipment and electronic equipment has the appropriate electronic compliance sticker for your state or even country. Batteries store a lot of energy. If all of that energy were to come out of the battery quickly, the battery would explode. Now the battery I've shown on this slide is a lead acid battery. It's a type of battery you'd use in a motor vehicle, but it could be any sort of battery. So these safety steps to be observed with batteries doesn't just apply to lead acid batteries, it applies to all batteries. One of the things you'd never do is short circuit a battery. If you connected a wire between the terminals of this battery, say you put a spanner across there, that spanner would become so hot you'd burn yourself. And the battery could explode too, and that applies to small transistor type batteries, all types of batteries. So you never short circuit a battery, never dispose of a battery in a fire. Again, it could explode. Always use a fuse. If you're using a battery to power your amateur radio station, then in one of the leads, either the positive or negative lead, usually the negative lead, you would have an inline fuse for safety. Never puncture a battery. Never throw it in the garbage bin, and it might get punctured in there by something else. Never deliberately puncture it by a hammering or whatever, because they may explode and they may release dangerous chemicals. They can burn you or they can affect your lungs. Some batteries need good ventilation. Lead acid cells need to have good ventilation because they produce gases, and those gases are combustible. And if you have lead acid cells in a confined box, those gases can build up and they can explode if they are ignited. The chemicals in batteries are poisonous and corrosive. So this is so you would never tip the electrolyte out of a battery or break it open unless you competently know what you are doing. So they're all the safety things that you need to know for the foundation for batteries. Radio waves can be dangerous. It's not a real problem with the foundation license because you are limited to a maximum peak power of 10 watts. 10 watts is not a particularly dangerous power level. However, if you were using a handheld radio, you would not, for example, put the tip of the antenna in your eye or into any other body orifice, because transmitting so close to your body could be dangerous even with 10 watts. A smart thing to do with handheld radios is to get a extension microphone and use the microphone to talk on and hold the handheld radio out at arm's length. That's prudent avoidance of any danger. Some people don't do it, it's up to you. What you do need to know for your foundation license that, and I've spelt form, I do that all the time, wrong. The danger from radio waves increases with their frequency. So the higher the frequency, the more dangerous the wave is. The higher the power of the radio wave, the more danger it is. And the distance between you or some other person and the antenna, as that distance decreases, as your proximity to the antenna becomes closer, then the danger from radiation is more important. If you're running several hundred watts, you wouldn't be a foundation licensee, but you should have your antenna located so that persons and animals cannot touch it while you're transmitting. Directional antennas can be more dangerous as they focus radio energy in one or more directions. Directional antennas focus or concentrate all of the radio energy perhaps in one direction, and if you're standing in that direction, you're going to receive much more radiation than you would normally. For the foundation level, you don't have to be too concerned about radiation safety. 10 watts is your maximum peak power. Just don't do silly things like put antennas in your mouth or your ear or your nose or any other opening in your body and transmit. The eye is particularly susceptible to radiation, RF radiation, and the type of damage done to the eye is cumulative. A bit like the ears. If you use headphones and have them on loud for too long, you can damage your ear or ears over a period of time. Similarly, the RF damage to an eye is cumulative over years. But at 10 watts, at a foundation license level, as long as you don't do silly things, you're not going to have any danger to yourself or anyone else. Erecting amateur radio antennas on masts and poles and roofs requires a degree of skill and knowledge of construction methods of roofs and towers and the like. And antennas should only be erected by competent persons. To climb a tower, you need a whole lot of safety gear, you need gloves, boots, a safety belt, a whole lot of things. You aren't tested or assessed on those things in your foundation assessment. What you are tested on is that you are aware that such dangerous activities as erecting antennas should be done by someone trained to do the job. If you are a foundation licensee and you're also a rigger, then you would be a competent person to erect antennas. But if you're a young person and you're going to climb a tower by yourself, that would be a very, very silly thing to do. First of all, you may not be able to do the work. You really should have a competent person, perhaps another radio amateur, or just perhaps another person, doesn't have to be a radio amateur, to assist you in erecting your antennas if you're not competent to do so yourself. If you don't have all the training on climbing and safety, you shouldn't attempt it. Your amateur radio antenna is a sponge for lightning. Well, not quite, but there is a probability that one day your antenna may have a close hit. This is an amateur radio antenna, actually, by the way, and this is a lightning bolt hitting that amateur radio antenna. It doesn't really matter if lightning hits your antenna, what sort of protection you have for lightning strike, lightning arresters and so forth, but if lightning directly hits your antenna or close to it, it's going to do some damage to your equipment. So a really good smart thing to do is not operate during a lightning storm. Disconnect your antennas and optionally earth them, but certainly disconnect them and not during a lightning storm. It could save you an awful lot of money. It's inconvenient to disconnect the antenna for an hour or so while the lightning storm's there, but it really could save you an awful lot of money. A nearby lightning strike could do you injury, could give you an electric shock, and could totally decimate your equipment. So during a lightning storm, disconnect your antennas and optionally wrap a wire around them and connect them to earth. Well, that's it for safety for the foundation license. You do not have to know the CPR chart. This CPR chart is brought out by the Australian Resuscitation Council. You will not be assessed on any of its contents. However, you will be assessed on the need, or may perhaps for the need to use CPR after you've removed someone from a hazardous situation, but you won't actually have to do it. But it's a very, very good idea for all amateur radio stations to have a chart like this hanging up in their room, in their station, in case of emergency, not just for you, but for other persons in your household. They might be the ones applying CPR to you because you've had or experienced a hazard which has stopped your breathing or heartbeat. So that's it for safety for the foundation license. I hope your course is going well for you. Please test yourself with the self-test drills, and I'll see you back in the next tutorial. Thank you for your attention. Cheers for now. This is Ron, BK2DQ.